Velvet Note's a place where you can see and hear world-class musicians in a setting that's as intimate and as comfortable as your very own living room. What we try to do here is bring down the wall that often exists between artists and audiences. We give you a chance to get to know the artist. You're always guaranteed a chance to meet the artist. And we also want you to hear the music the way that it was meant to be heard. We have the best jazz performers in the world who perform here. Grammy winners, people who are legends in the jazz field. And all you have to do is go right down the street. Here, you're able to see them, and they're right in front of you. They're an arm's length away from you. It's like they're performing a private concert for you and the people you love. It's a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
Hi, I'm Carla Harris. As a performer and as a listener who has enjoyed some incredible shows at the Velvet Note over the years, I've often been struck by how, when people are inside those walls, the issues of the world outside just fall away, and the connection between everyone inside is heightened. To me, that is the power and the magic and the beauty of the live music experience. And it's why I hope that as you enjoy the encore concerts that the Velvet Note is streaming each weekend, that, if you are able, that you would click the donate button that you see somewhere on your screen, because when you do, you'll help the Velvet Note make it through this tough time and be there when we can gather again and feel that magic. So thanks for helping Tamara keep the stage lights and the twinkle lights on. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the music.
All we need is love and music, and a little chocolate now and then doesn't hurt. Please help us bring these performances into your home without charging a fee. Donate at thevelvetnote.com. Donate. Hi, I'm Tamara Fuller, owner of the Velvet Note, and we welcome you to another magical evening of music in our virtual club. Before we get started, let me introduce the band. Nick Rosen's calling for music began very young, when he was plucking out tunes at the piano. Over the years, he's toured with Russell Gunn, Dion Ferris, Colonel Bruce Hampton, Liz Brasher, and the Magpie Salute. In early 2018, he joined the Shadowboxers on their tour opening for Justin Timberlake. Nick has accompanied legends such as Jennifer Holliday, Roy Ayers, and Nathan East, and has appeared on albums by Curtis Fuller, soul artists Donnie and Julie Dexter, as well as newcomers like Faye Webster. He received a Bachelor of Arts in Jazz Studies from Florida State University, where his seminal piano instructors were Bill Peterson and Marcus Roberts. In early 2015, his album Step Into the Light was released on Rope-A-Dope Records. The album features artists Oteil Burbridge, Saunders Sermons, Terrion Gully, and Daryl Reeves. John Sanford is a jazz tenor saxophonist who has landed in Atlanta, Georgia after spending portions of his career in Chicago, Illinois, Long Island, New York, and Buffalo, New York. After receiving his degree from Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, John was an active presence on the Chicago music scene, performing with many of Chicago's great jazz musicians, including George Flutis, Jody Christian, Jeff Parker, and many others. While in Chicago, he became a member of the critically acclaimed Sony recording artist Mighty Blue Kings, appearing on the Mighty Blue Kings Sony release live from Chicago, as well as the independent releases A Christmas Album and Alive in the City. With Mighty Blue Kings, John has toured extensively in the United States and Europe, sharing bills with B.B. King, Ray Charles, Diana Krall, Tony Bennett, Buddy Guy, and many others. Kevin Smith was exposed to music at a young age, growing up in some of Atlanta's historical Black Baptist churches. Being exposed to the culture's hymnody, Negro spirituals, country blues, and gospel music would set the foundation for a successful music career. In his senior year of high school, he won his Grammy Award for his project with local hip-hop group Outkast. After finishing high school, Kevin was accepted into Florida State University and received a scholarship to be placed in the School of Music's String Performance Program. Here, he studied classical Baroque contrabass with Melanie Punter from the Orchestra of St. Luke's and Atlanta Baroque Orchestra, and was under the direction of Maestro Dr. Alex Jimenez from the University Symphony. He was also accepted into the Jazz Studies departments, where he studied jazz bass with Rodney Jordan. He also studied and performed with department head Leon Anderson Jr., Marcus Roberts, Wynton Marsalis, Scotty Barnhart from the Count Basie Orchestra and the Duke Ellington Orchestra, Inga Swearengin, and Dr. John Parks. Kevin also held a chair in the Tallahassee Symphony Orchestra and has played in the Columbus Symphony, Albany Symphony, and Dothan Opera Orchestras. Born in Jacksonville, Florida, Justin Varnes began studying music at 10 on the trumpet. His father, an avid jazz listener, exposed him to Stan Kenton, Nat King Cole, and Errol Garner. After attending Douglas Anderson School of the Arts on trumpet, Justin then switched to the drum set and studied music at the University of North Florida, where he graduated with degrees in jazz studies and percussion. Justin relocated to New York City, where he continued to study at the New School and studied privately with Jojo Mayer. In New York, Justin began touring with Phoebe Snow, with whom he performed on the Roseanne Barr Show, as well as National Public Radio's World Cafe, where he would later perform with the pop music band Five for Fighting. Justin is currently a music teacher at the prestigious Lovett School, music director for the Velvet Note, and founder of the acclaimed online drummers resource and the Legends of Jazz series in its 7th season.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'd like to say that we get so many of them that it doesn't really faze me, but that's not true. I appreciate everyone. Oh, hi. Hello, and welcome to another sold-out night at the Velvet Note! The Velvet Note's a place where you can see and hear world-class musicians in a setting that's as intimate and as comfortable as your very own living room, with your children playing outside, nearby, with the window open, so that you can hear every laugh and cackle. Just saying. We're in a listening room here. We had our acoustics designed by a protege of the Hollywood director, George Lucas, under his guidance, to be the highest quality, unenhanced sound available today. After 7 years and 7 months. We're happy to report back that the Velvet Note got word a couple of weeks ago from Downbeat magazine that we've won our 5th consecutive award for being one of the top 100 jazz clubs in the world. So, I want to tell you a little bit about this series. I'm going to tell you something personal, and then we're going to go into the show, okay? Okay. So, this is a series. And the great thing about this is that you not only get the concert, but you also get the cultural and historical context of the musicians and the music. And I think it helps us all enjoy it more. It's conceived of and produced by our very own music producer here, Mr. Justin Barnes, who also plays drums tonight. And I can't think of anyone who could possibly do that better. He has with him Grammy Award-winning bassist Kevin Smith. He has saxophonist John Sanford. Pianist Nick Rosen. And then, as an extra treat tonight, because of the subject matter, we have trumpeter Justin Powell. So, this is the first tribute, and we've been doing this for a few years now, where I've actually known the subject of the performance. So I want to tell you a little bit about my encounter with Wynton Marsalis, whose seminal work, Black Codes, we'll be listening to tonight. So I went to go see him for a show that he does every year around Christmas time with his big band. And afterwards, we just thought, hey, we'll just go backstage and see if anything good happens. And we waited back there a while, and one of the guys who was managing that says, who are you? I said, well, I'm me. And these cats behind me, even though they're very young, 15, 14, 13, they're all young musicians. And we would like to meet Mr. Marsalis. We waited a little while, and then he said, come on back. So it's the five of us in Wynton Marsalis' dressing room. And he's got a bus out there waiting for him. And he stays back there with us for an hour while the bus is waiting. And the young kids I was with were captivated. The subject of his talk was that it's not enough to just play the notes. It's what makes the difference is the feeling, the energy, the vibe underneath it, the extent to which you care about connecting what you have learned with your audience. And he listened to them, and he talked with them, and he never said a word to me. And it could not have been more fascinating, illustrative, and wonderful. Put your hands together for the Justin Barnes Quintet with Wynton Marsalis' Black Codes!
Thank you all so much. That was the opening track and the title track to the Wynton Marsalis album entitled Black Codes from the Underground. This album is definitely the newest album we've ever done. It was the latest release that we've done so far. It's so new that it actually was released during, like, I was alive when this album came out. So. Which I'm gonna say means that the album is really new, not that I'm really old. So this album has a pretty personal connection to me. And when I was 12 years old, I'd just gotten into an arts high school or an arts school going into my 8th grade year down in Jacksonville, Florida. I got there. We have Jacksonville fans in the house. Yeah, there we go. All right, West Side, the best side. So I got accepted to this art school called Douglas Anderson School of the Arts, and I was a trumpet player. And I got on the bus the first day of school, driving there. They bussed us from across the town, and the kid next to me is a trombone player by the name of Van Battle. His full name was Vanderbilt Charles Tolliver Battle, which is a mouthful, but he's a really, really nice kid, and he was listening to some music, and I told him I was a trumpet player, and he said he was a trombone player, and he said, man, have you heard this new Wynton Marsalis record? And I was 12. I had a trumpet. I was like fairly good at it, but I was just starting this whole like journey. I hadn't even really started this whole journey into jazz yet. He's like, man, listen to this. And he put on this record, and that opening song that you heard, I had never heard anything like that in my life. Like, I was not prepared for it. I'd been listening to some jazz. My dad had played a bunch of jazz when I was a kid, and so I had, Dave Brubeck and Stan Kenton and Duke Ellington, Errol Garner, and these sorts of sounds in my head. And then at the time, this was the mid-'80s, a lot of the jazz that I heard, like going on in the jazz festivals and playing on the jazz radio, was more stuff like, Al Jarreau and Spyro Gyra, and a bunch of great music, but it sounded nothing like this. And one of the things that really captivated me was, and a lot of my friends, was that instead of like electric keyboards and electric basses and maybe some like vocals and a big like show, it was just, people playing the instruments we played in band. There was a trumpet and a saxophone and an acoustic bass and an acoustic piano. And myself and a lot of the people in the band program, we just became obsessed with this album and a bunch of albums that came out around this time. So when I got into college and I started to meet people not from just my high school, I realized that so many of us had the same experience. We were kind of like playing our instruments, but when at the time, the musicians on this album were maybe 10 to 15 years older than we were. So to see people that were at that point, most of the people I was listening to that were jazz, like from my dad's collection, they were around the age of dead, right? To think that anyone was playing remotely around my age was just like, we just thought these guys were rock stars, And you could turn on the Tonight Show, or you could turn on VH1 or the Grammys or something and see some of these guys play. It had a profound impact on me becoming a jazz musician and a lot of the people I knew. And then when I got to college and I started to realize that this one album really did set this whole course in motion for so many musicians to say, okay, jazz isn't this like old dead thing from the 40s. Like, it's alive and well and it's breathing. And so this album means a lot to me. It's a lot of fun to play. We're going to play another tune for you now, but before I do, please help me thank Mr. John Sanford on the tenor saxophone. Very special guest joining us tonight, Mr. Justin Powell on the trumpet. Nick Rosen in the snazzy jacket on the piano. And Kevin Smith back here on the bass. There we go. Both Nick and Kevin flew in from New York yesterday, and just to make it back in time to play this gig. So I really do appreciate you guys doing this with me tonight. Yeah. John came all the way from Tucker. He woke up at 2 o'clock this afternoon. And he's going to get paid the same. That doesn't seem fair. Exactly. So we're going to continue now. This is the second song off of the album. This is entitled For We Folks, and it's W-E-E, For We Folks. I don't know if you guys caught that or not, but when I first came in with the tempo, it was not even close to the right tempo. And Kevin Smith just kind of like side-eyed me like, is that where you think that goes? Whoopsies. So I was just like, hang in, I'll get it up there, I'll get it cranked up, give me a second. So, really, he tries to keep me straight. He's got his work cut out for him. So, that tune, beautiful tune entitled For We Folks. This album, it was recorded in 1985, released in the middle of 1985. During the 1986 Grammys, it won 2 Grammys, one for Best Instrumental Jazz Performance by an individual or group, and also for Best Jazz Instrumental Performance Soloist for Wynton. And this was his 4th solo album. He'd obviously done 3 previous, but in the early 80s, he landed a gig with the great Art Blakey. Both he and his brother, Branford Marsalis, landed a gig with Art Blakey, and they were touring with Art Blakey. They were starting to slowly kind of build names for themselves. So he got signed to Columbia Records. The first album, which was entitled Wynton Marsalis, a really good record. He had some big names on there like Ron Carter and Tony Williams and guys like that, with a mix of a couple of his originals and also a bunch of jazz standards. Second album was entitled Think of One, similar kind of effect. The third album was kind of like a little tip of the cap to the Clifford Brown with strings or Charlie Parker with strings. It's called Hot House Flowers. And so Columbia was kind of putting him through the paces of like, okay, he's a young trumpet player. He needs to play with some of Miles Davis's old rhythm section who was Tony Williams and Ron Carter. All right, he needs to do a strings album, that sort of thing. But by the 4th record, no more famous jazz musicians, no more concept albums. He got to record an album of his that was all original material with his band, the band he kind of grew up playing with, or had developed playing with over these last couple years. All original stuff, kind of a little bit of a concept album, and it was this album that really kind of catapulted Wynton Marsalis into the stratosphere. Now, before that, while he was developing under Art Blakey's tutelage, simultaneously he was recording and developing his own career as a classical trumpet player. Matter of fact, he's the first musician to win a Jazz Grammy and a Classical Grammy in the same year. So he was recording and playing with the Boston Pops, and there's a couple of albums you can get in the early 80s where he's doing all the famous trumpet concertos, the Hummel and the Haydn and the Mozart. So he was becoming equally popular and famous in the classical world as well as the jazz world, and these kind of came to a head around 1985, 1986. I mentioned his brother Branford. Wynton comes from a very musical family. For those of you who don't know, his father Ellis Marsalis and his mother Dolores. They have 6 sons. 3 or 4 of them are into music. The oldest is Branford Marsalis, the saxophone player, and then Wynton. But he also has a younger brother named Delphio Marsalis, who plays the trombone, and an even younger brother named Jason Marsalis, who plays the drums and plays the vibes. And he has a couple other brothers who do some stuff in music as well. But he wrote a song actually for his trombone playing brother, and the song we're going to play for you right now is entitled Delphio's Dilemma. And it's a lot of fun to play. There's some twists and turns in there. I think just to annoy jazz musicians for the end of time. It's a fast song with a whole bunch of chord changes, kind of bebop-ish in style, but in the middle of it, there's one measure that has one less beat. So just out of nowhere, it's in 4, and every now and then we have to try to figure out where that bar is. So if you see a lot of furrowed brows up here, or a lot of like, no, there's where we are. Just know that Wynton did that to us. So here is our best interpretation of Wynton Marsalis' Delphio's Dilemma. So that tune, Delphio's Dilemma, was one of the first ones we tried to, as kids, figure out. It was an embarrassingly long time before I figured out there was a bar of 3/4 in there. So we'll just leave it at that. But that's maybe one of the jazz standards that kind of came out of this this group of tunes. I'd mentioned that Wynton was basically studying jazz and classical equally, and that's one of the things I think you could hear in his compositions. He's raised in the tradition of jazz because his father obviously is he was a jazz pianist, and he named Wynton after the great jazz pianist Wynton Kelly. And so he grew up with the sound of that music and those time-honored elements of jazz, from the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s, things that swing, blues, improvisation, these sorts of things are built into his compositions. But unlike a lot of other kind of jazz compositions that were that kind of like old school sound that he was dealing with, is the compositions themselves, they were more complex. They had forms that were a little bit more through composed the way a classical composer might put together a theme or a melody. And he thought very much like that about expanding a theme and bringing it back, but maybe in a different key or in a different tempo. And these are things that a lot of jazz musicians, it kind of had fallen by the wayside, at least with the straight ahead crowd. A lot of it had turned into that kind of bebop style where there was kind of maybe a fairly complicated melody, but then after that it was just a whole bunch of solos, and then you come back and you play that melody one more time. There'd kind of been a blueprint for how to play that straight ahead music, and Wynton came in with these newer ideas for compositions, and played with this level of fire and intensity and these sounds that had kind of had been lost for a little while. And so we're going to do a tune for you now. This is the next tune off the record. It's entitled Frisinian Man. And he's got a thing going on where basically you hear a call and response from the melody to the rhythm section. We have a little rhythm section part. We kind of bounce that back and forth in a call and response motion with the horn players. And then when we go into solos, Wynton said he was specific. He didn't want the standard one horn player takes a solo, then the next horn player takes a solo, and then the piano player takes a solo, and the bass player, and then we trade fours. Another kind of stock thing. Instead, he wanted to insert the piano solo a little bit earlier and kind of break up that thing. So for those of you who came only to hear John Sanford, you're going to have to wait a little bit longer than normal on this next song, just so you know. But hang on, it's coming. He's going to get his notes in, I promise. So here's our version of Wynton Marsalis's Frisinian Man.
He can't read that. It's just for show. It's blank.
It's cartoons. Thank you guys so much. So I'd mentioned, it was in the mid '80s. We kind of had this explosion of Wynton Marsalis on the scene, and it really kind of took flight at those Grammys, if you will, and things started to kind of develop from there. But this idea of the sound of jazz kind of changing. For those of you who have come to this a lot, you hear me speak about this a lot, which is this. I think art works in this kind of pendulum swing way. Something, some sort of art develops, and whatever the sensibilities and the characteristics are, as they keep going this way, at some point, the next generation slaps it back to the other side, and then it's over there for a long time, and it kind of goes back and forth. And this is the case through all sorts of art, through all walks of life and all different parts of time. You okay over there, Kevin Smith?
Yeah.
Need some hydration? There it is. Oh, Justin Powell on the bottled water, ladies and gentlemen. So, in the 40s and 50s and 60s, this sound of swing and straight ahead jazz was the thing. And then as fusion came around, the pendulum kind of swung the other direction. And all of a sudden, acoustic instruments and playing swing and that sort of old sound, well, that's what it was. It became kind of old sounding. So, Miles, developed, and there's lots of great, Weather Report, and all these great fusion groups, rock groups kind of put together, Mahavishnu Orchestra, and the sound of jazz changed in the mid to late 60s. And then most throughout the 70s, that's the sort of stuff that sounded like jazz. But it was around actually, most people credit this one incident, or this one event happening, as kind of starting to be where we flip the pendulum back the other way. And that was in the 70s, a lot of great, straight ahead, classic jazz musicians who were having trouble finding work here had moved to Europe, where they could play a lot more, they could have a sustainable lifestyle. I'd mentioned, we've talked about, Coleman Hawkins going over there, Chet Baker going over there, and a lot of great jazz musicians, including one of my favorite drummers, Kenny Clark. When Kenny Clark went over there, he basically never came back. He loved it there. So one of those musicians who made quite a name for himself during this time in Europe was the great tenor saxophonist Dexter Gordon. Well, Dexter finally came back to America and did a residency at the Village Vanguard in 1976. And they recorded it, and it was like that style of jazz had been missing for so long. So that's really kind of the beginning, the spark of musicians and jazz lovers missing that old sound from like the 40s and 50s. And then that slowly developed, and then really, when Wynton came along, instead of it being these great older jazz musicians playing that style of music, to hear a bunch of younger musicians develop this and pass the torch was really kind of the lightning rod for this, what became known as the Renaissance era of jazz. And Wynton was kind of at the forefront of that. It sparked all sorts of great opportunities for young jazz musicians. Record labels opened back up for jazz. Big record labels started having jazz divisions again, or their budgets grew, and a lot of great younger jazz musicians got opportunities to make records. And those younger jazz musicians, like Wynton Marsalis and Branford Marsalis, started to be, there's a little nickname for them called the Young Lions. And that's they kind of dominated the jazz scene there in the late 80s. And this trend kind of passed on throughout most of the 1990s. But it was, although this album didn't start that, it was this album that really kind of galvanized this movement to change the sound of jazz to where we missed that. So this record really did a lot for that. So we're going to continue on now. We're going to do the ballad off the record. It's a beautiful tune, lots of cool textures and colors, kind of in the Billy Strayhorn, Duke Ellington palette, if you will. It's a tune entitled Aural Oasis. Much shorter. Here we go. Thank you, guys. We're about to play the last tune after this album, actually basically directly after this album. The band was Wynton Marsalis, his brother Branford, the late great pianist Kenny Kirkland, a young bass player, 17 years old, named Charnette Moffett, and Jeff Tain Watts on the drums. This was kind of the band, we all looked up to these guys, and right after this album hit and started to pick up steam, Branford got a call from Sting. And Branford and Kenny Kirkland both got the opportunity to tour and record with Sting. I think the first album they recorded on is entitled Dream of the Blue Turtles, and Kenny and Branford worked with Sting quite a bit during that period. So, which was great for them, but Wynton had finally gotten to the point, he finally got this one album out with all of his band, his music, and his brother, of all people, and a great pianist, left the band. So right from that one moment in time with this record, like all the pieces come together. Then Wynton starts to, has to put a new band together. He retains Jeff Tain Watts, I guess the great Marcus Roberts on piano, and Robert Hurst on the bass, and puts a quartet together. And then obviously Wynton goes on to run and direct the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra. So obviously he did fine, and so did Branford Marsalis with his own albums and touring with Sting and the Grateful Dead and whatever. So a lot of great things happened basically when all of those musicians kind of came together on this record. The last tune we're going to do wasn't written by Wynton Marsalis. It was the only tune not written by Wynton. It was written by Kenny Kirkland. And this song in particular sort of exemplifies or personifies a lot of what this band was about, which was some of the innovations that they were kind of bringing to the table or resurrecting, if you will, came from the second great quintet, the Miles Davis's second great quintet. This was kind of the band they were trying to model themselves after. And being young musicians kind of playing fiery music, they got into this thing where they basically almost turned jazz into a sport, where they would just try to play fast and just see how long they could go, and just energy and craziness, to the point that this developed a name which was entitled burnout. So sometimes you hear this music and it's just like it's so much going on at once and your head's about to explode. That's probably what you're listening to, is some form of burnout. So it's usually faster tempos and craziness usually ensues. The other cool thing they were doing was, instead of just saying, okay, you're going to solo for 16 bars, and you're going to solo for 32 bars, and then we're going to go on, they wanted to improvise not only the notes that they're playing, but they wanted to improvise within the song, improvise with a song form, make decisions at that moment when you're going to go from letter B to letter C. And they developed a system to do this, which they actually learned from Miles Davis, where you can play a particular set of notes, and that set of notes means you move on. So this was, something that had been done before, but they just brought it to a whole other level of artistry. So on this tune, Chambers of Tain, we're going to do some of that. Wish us luck on that part. That's probably the most difficult part. Before we go, please help me thank again once again Mr. John Sanford on the tenor saxophone. Justin Powell sitting in on trumpet, special guest. Nick Rosen on the piano. Jet lagged as he is. Even more jet lagged, Mr. Kevin Smith on the bass. This tune is entitled Chambers of Tain, written obviously for the great Jeff Tain Watts. It's really fast, it's really difficult, we're going to make a lot of mistakes, but hang on and enjoy. Jazz stand for Justin Powell, Nick Rosen, Kevin Smith, and the Justin Blunt. Thank you guys so much for coming out and spending your Sunday evening with us.
The Velvet Note's a place where you can see and hear world-class musicians in a setting that's as intimate and as comfortable as your very own living room. What we try to do here is bring down the wall that often exists between artists and audiences. We give you a chance to get to know the artist. You're always guaranteed a chance to meet the artist. And we also want you to hear the music the way that it was meant to be heard. We have the best jazz performers in the world who perform here. Grammy winners, people who are legends in the jazz field. And all you have to do is go right down the street. Here, you're able to see them, and they're right in front of you. They're an arm's length away from you. It's like they're performing a private concert for you and the people you love. It's a once-in-a-lifetime experience.